In our previous video we created this page which is pulling all of this data directly out of our database and displaying it to us in a dynamic format. We haven't, however, dealt with actually inputting this data back into our database yet, which is going to be the subject of this video. In NetBeans we currently have a form, but for simplicity's sake I'm going to move this form over into our actual template, which will make managing the entire process much easier. And we're just going to send all of the information back to the same page. And we're going to do so with the post method. In our controller, I'm going to head and create a new if statement, which, just like the others, will call a specific method to update our database. The specific method it calls, however, will be called update team selection data, and we'll go ahead and create that class within our model, or that method rather, within our model. And just for now, I'll var dump all of the information which was posted across out. And then kill our script. This means that in our actual template we are going to have to add an additional field here, which will be a hidden input field, which will be called run, with the value of true. We can also go ahead and name our select elements. If we go back across to our browser and refresh our page, and then select some of the data, and then click any of the submit buttons, it will take us across to our page, and as we can see it's already set our parameters for us. Now we're going to need a good way to determine which actual button is being clicked, and we can actually use the name of the button to actually pass that information across to us. So rather than having a run hidden field, we can add a name and a value to our button, in this case run and select. And in our second button we can have run and deselect. If we go back to our browser, refresh our page, and select this person and click the select button, we can see that run is now select. If we select the person that we want to deselect from our team and click the deselect button, we can see that we're going to get the information across that we're going to need to be able to delete this player from our database. If we selected players on the left and then eventually clicked the deselect button, it's going to give us this information. And so because we're not actually getting the information across as to which players we want to deselect, we will be able to determine by the lack of deselected players that this was an invalid entry, and we won't take any action in this case. So back across in our team model, we can begin to process this information. So we're going to have a run variable. And then we're going to be able to have an if statement. So if run is equal to select, then we'll be able to take some action. Else, if run is equal to deselect, we'll be able to take some other action. So if we click select, we're going to expect that our user has selected some players from our available players list. And so we can import that information. Similarly, if we're going to deselect players, we're going to expect our user to have selected players, which we will then remove from our database. Now, in order for us to actually perform the addition and remove actions, we're going to need to also pass across some more information. This time it will be in an input, which will be hidden. This time it's going to be the fixture ID. Which we're going to need to pass across. And we're also going to need the team ID. And because we don't already have this, we will need to add it to our list of attributes. Which we will then need to populate in our selection. So it will just be a normal string entry. So if we go back across to our browser again and refresh, and so this is because when we've actually called our stretch league, we have returned our fixture ID, but we haven't returned our team ID. We've only used it to narrow our terms. When we're dealing with the team ID, we've obviously got the home team ID or the away team ID. In order for us to not have to worry about this, i.e. which specific team, whether it's home or away, we can manually add this into our returns data. So this version isn't going to come back from our database. This is going to be the information which is passed across in the URL. So if we go back to our browser yet again and refresh again, we're going to get all of this information back in our table as we would expect it to. If we try to select now, our team ID is selected, our fixture ID is selected, available players is selected. In fact, available players can be turned into player ID. So we do that now. I'm going to leave it as available players over in the actual selection page itself, just so that it doesn't get confusing. But if we head back across the model, we can basically duplicate this for the fixture ID, as well as the team ID. We'll also need these for the other two elements if we're deselecting elements as well. So I'll put that outside of our if statement, just to remove any duplication. Actually, we need to select players. It's going to be player ID as well. So the next thing that we're going to do is to test whether each of these elements is completed or whether it's been passed across. So we're just going to have if it's null for the player ID, or rather not null. And if the fixture ID isn't null, and if the team ID isn't null, we're going to need to do this inside of each of these if statements. In this case, we're going to call this SL insert fixture player. And we'll pass across all three of these variables. So player ID, fixture ID, and team ID. We will then have a very similar function in our stretch league called remove fixture player. We can remove this for dump and die now as well. So in our stretch league, we're going to create two new functions. And I'll actually copy across the entire name of it, including the variables. We have insert and remove, not delete. And all we're going to do in insert is copy across and insert statements from above. And we're just going to insert that into the fixture player table. Everything else is going to remain exactly the same, because the three fields within the fixture player table are the team ID, the player ID, and the fixture ID. We're then going to have a delete for our remove section. I don't know if I've used the delete. Yes, I have. So this is going to be for the fixture player table. And the other three fields are going to remain the same. If we head back across to our browser now and go back and refresh our page, we can add Matthews as a fixture player by clicking this button. So he is now removed from the list on the left and added to the list on the right. We can now remove our selected player of Torres, and he will then appear in the list on the left. In the next section, we're going to have a look at all of our templates and see if we can simplify the styling, because, for example, Paper Shadow is styled in pretty much every single template at the moment, which is obviously quite wasteful. We would rather use a single style sheet to include all of that information. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. So if we go into fixtures and go into one of the teams, it's this element that we've just restyled, which is obviously working properly and fully as we intended.